Did Jesus affirm the Old Testament God, or did he see himself as someone who needed to fix what the Old Testament God had messed up? In Christian theology, we call the perspectives on Old Testament and New Testament continuity or discontinuity. And when someone has a theology of discontinuity, what they essentially teach is that the Old Testament, basically all of it, is just donezo. We're done with it, it's over, and Jesus came to basically end all of that and start something completely new. Whereas in the theology of continuity, there is basically a continuous line, some might say the meta-narrative of Scripture, so the big picture, from the beginning in the Old Testament all the way to the end in Revelation. And yes, things changed when Jesus came as the Redeemer. It's not like Jesus was doing something so completely different than the Old Testament that, the Old Testament God is evil and the New Testament Jesus is good. Often based on struggles with how the Old Testament God behaves. We want evil to be held accountable. And oftentimes we forget that when we read passages in the Bible. It's like we think that everybody in the Bible was just perfectly good and innocent and never committed any sin. These people were killing children, passing them through the fire, burning them, sacrificing them. These are just a few of the things that were happening. And yet we stand back from the Old Testament and we say God shouldn't judge them. That's mean. Yahweh is cruel. He's unfair. And yet when you look at the context of what is happening and you understand the love that God has for the weak, the oppressed, and those in need, then you see that God's justice and his desire to protect the innocent is always the driver behind his judgment. So when you see the angel of the Lord acting as an adversary to Israel, you can know that he has done it out of love for those who were in need. And that is exactly what Jesus does. When we get to the New Testament, he offers himself to anyone who will call upon his name. But those who choose to oppose him reap the judgment that is their due. Jesus is a God of justice and love. He's not a safe God. He's not a God that you can mold to your own shape, your own liking. He had a lot to say about where he came from, what he was here to do, and he fully supported and fulfilled the role of Yahweh in the Old Testament. If you don't like Yahweh, you won't like Jesus.